NATO is broken, and this is a serious problem for Europe. With a violent history of failed military alliances, differing geopolitical interests, and growing threats on its borders, Europe is facing an existential crisis. Welcome to Living History. It is no secret that Europe's history is marked by a tapestry of military alliances, formed for defense and power balances such as the Triple Alliance and Triple Entente that ultimately led to World War I. Yet today, Europe lacks a unified military force, largely due to the formation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Established post-World War II, NATO includes European countries, the United States and Canada, serving as a collective defense mechanism. This reliance on NATO, along with the European Union's focus on economic and political integration, has diminished the perceived need for a separate European military. And before you say it, the EU's initiatives, like the Common Security and Defense Policy (CSDP), don't equate to an independent military force. And so, as we enter 2024, NATO is standing at a crossroads with high stakes. The alliance's budget has been supercharged, 438.1 million euros for civilian operations, and a massive 2.3 billion euros for military muscle, signaling a robust stance against Russia's Ukrainian aggression. Yet, beneath this show of unity, cracks are visible. Member states are divided in their political drive, and many are skimping on defense spending. But hold on, there's more. It's not just tanks and troops NATO is worried about now. The digital battleground, climate-induced security nightmares, and homegrown terrorism are on the rise. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly is sounding the alarm. Adapt fast or fall behind. Security isn't just about guns anymore. It's about safeguarding societies and democratic values. This is more than a wake-up call. It's a potential game-changer for European nations, who now face a critical decision: forge a brand new military alliance for Europe, or give the old one a radical makeover. The future of European security is hanging in the balance. Amidst these developments, the idea of a more unified European defense, or even an independent European military, is getting a lot of attention. Given NATO's current hurdles and the shifting landscape of global security, Europe might lean towards addressing its own defense needs more directly. However, this path is laden with complexities. Creating a new military alliance or overhauling the existing structure isn't just complicated, it's a political minefield. The complexity of EU member states' diverse political and defense priorities further complicates the idea of a unified European army. This move calls for a strong agreement among EU nations, a solid financial foundation, and strategic foresight. Plus, it's crucial to consider how such changes could impact relationships with allies across the Atlantic and alter the broader global security scenario. What is even more important, though, is that any European military alliance comes with a lot of historical baggage and, let's just say, trust issues. The idea of a unified European military is not a new one. Right after World War II, Europe was left with a pivotal challenge: how to reintegrate West Germany without reviving old fears of its military might. The French Prime Minister, René Pleven, came up with a plan in 1950 to establish a unified European army, which would mean that West German military units would be integrated with those of other European nations, ensuring no singular dominant force. The US supported the idea of a strong united Europe against the Soviet Union. Although 6 countries optimistically signed the treaty for a European defense community, France's National Assembly rejected it in 1954, and given that less than 10 years prior Germany was occupying France, this really should not have been a surprise. This, though, led to a shift from military to economic integration, laying the groundwork for the European Economic Community. That wasn't the end of it, though. With the end of the Cold War in 1992, the European Community transformed into the European Union. This wasn't just a name change. The EU dramatically broadened its horizons, moving beyond economics into political integration, with foreign policy and defense now a key EU pillar. Soon after, two of Europe's heavyweights, the UK Prime Minister and the French President, jointly recognized the EU's need for autonomous military action, backed by credible forces. This worried the US, who became increasingly concerned that a strengthened EU defense might overshadow NATO. And so, as the Soviet Union became a chapter in history books, questions loomed over NATO's future. In fact, Madeleine Albright, the US Secretary of State at the time, laid out the 3Ds doctrine for the EU. No duplication. The EU must avoid replicating NATO's efforts. No discrimination. EU defense policies should be inclusive of non-EU NATO members. And no decoupling. The EU must maintain strong ties with NATO. Despite American reservations, the EU boldly forged ahead with its defense ambitions, culminating in the Helsinki headline goal in 1999. However, the plot thickened in 2000. The US Secretary of Defense issued a stark warning. NATO could fade into irrelevance if the EU proceeded with its plan for a rapid reaction force. This was the US voicing fears of an EU defense force undermining NATO and diminishing American influence in European affairs. Facing pressure from the US and internal divisions within the EU, especially from the newer Eastern European members, the ambitious plan for a 60,000-troop rapid reaction force stumbled. By 2004, the EU pivoted to a new strategy, focusing on nimble, smaller units known as battle groups. Comprising about 1,500 troops each, these units were designed for rapid deployment in crises, bypassing the need for a large-scale army. However, what was also exposed in all this was the strategic and objective divide that existed between European and North American NATO member states. Ever since, tensions between the EU and the US have persisted, but no longer around military integration, but rather spending targets. Both Barack Obama and Donald Trump voiced concerns about most European nations not meeting their 2% of GDP defense spending targets. In fact, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute recently showed that the US spent 3.5% on defense and Britain spent 2.2%. However, Germany only spent 1.3%, while Italy, Canada, Spain, and the Netherlands were all falling well short of the 2% target. Given that, according to The Economist, Russia is currently spending 6.5% of its GDP on military, that is up from 4.1% pre-invasion of Ukraine, it is no surprise that President Trump even went as far as threatening to leave NATO if European members did not spend their fair share. I have been very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. And as things in Europe have escalated, this threat could soon become reality. After all, the Republican Party is increasingly less supportive of Ukraine, with $61 billion of US military assistance held up in Congress for months, and US geopolitical interests having clearly shifted towards Asia and the Middle East. So where does this leave Europe? The collapse of NATO would have far-reaching consequences for Europe and the international community. Firstly, it would leave a power vacuum in Eastern Europe, allowing for potential aggression and territorial disputes. Secondly, the dissolution of NATO could lead to a breakdown in trust and cooperation among member states, undermining the progress made in European integration. After all, the ghosts of history are ever present in European geopolitics. Additionally, the loss of a unified defense alliance would weaken Europe's collective bargaining power on the global stage, leaving individual nations vulnerable to external pressures and, of course, aggression. Furthermore, a NATO dissolution would have significant economic and security implications for Europe. The defense spending commitments made by NATO member states have not only ensured their own security, but also contributed to economic growth and stability. The dismantling of NATO would result in a decline in defense investment, potentially leading to a regional arms race and increased instability. Moreover, the absence of a collective defense mechanism would necessitate individual countries to shoulder the burden of their own security, diverting resources from other vital sectors such as healthcare and education. By contrast, contrast, the weakening of NATO would dramatically increase Russia's position in European security. It has, after all, become clear that Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin leadership have decided that the European security order developed in the aftermath of the Cold War disregards Russian interests, and they intend to take every opportunity to undermine that order and redefine Russia in opposition to the United States and the West. So while it is no secret that NATO's continued existence creates a problem for Russia, the disappearance of the alliance would also create a problem for Europe. Without NATO's protective umbrella, Europe would lack the self-confidence required for a coherent and constructive engagement with the Eurasian power. The likely result is that some European countries would seek their own deals with Moscow. And here, the echoes of history grow even louder. European military alliances in the 19th and 20th centuries should serve as cautionary tales for the present. In the 19th century, following the Napoleonic Wars, the concert of Europe was established, involving major powers like Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. This system aimed to maintain a balance of power and prevent the rise of a dominant state. However, the concert gradually decayed due to competing national interests and the growth of nationalism, exemplified by the unification of Germany under Otto von Bismarck in 1871. The result? By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Europe saw the formation of complex alliances. The Triple Alliance 1882 brought together Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, primarily as a response to French militarism. In contrast, the Triple Entente 1907, consisting of France, Russia, and Britain, was formed partly due to mutual distrust of German ambitions. These alliances, based on mutual defense pacts, contributed in no small part to the outbreak of World War I in 1914, as the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria led to a chain reaction of treaty obligations being invoked. Post-World War I, the League of Nations was created in 1920, intending to prevent future conflicts. However, key players like the United States never joined, and it lacked enforcement mechanisms, rendering it ineffective against aggressive actions such as by Japan in Manchuria 1931, Italy in Ethiopia 1935, and of course Germany's expansion under Adolf Hitler. The failure of the League of Nations and the policy of appeasement towards aggressive states like Nazi Germany set the stage for World War II. And then, of course, there is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, a non-aggression treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, which demonstrated how volatile and transient alliances could be, with the two powers initially dividing Eastern Europe between them, only for Germany to later invade the Soviet Union in 1941. Post-World War II, the formation of NATO in 1949 marked a significant shift. Designed as a collective defense mechanism against the Soviet Union, it included the US, Canada, and several Western European nations. The Warsaw Pact of 1955, led by the Soviet Union and including Eastern European satellite states, was a direct response to NATO. These alliances defined the military landscape of the Cold War era, with Europe divided into two armed camps. So, what can we learn from all this? Well, the way I see it, European military alliances have often been reactive, formed in response to immediate threats rather than long-term strategic planning. The complexity and interdependence of these alliances, more often than not, led to unintended escalations, as seen in World War I and World War II. Moreover, the failure of collective security in the interwar period and the volatile nature of alliances, as demonstrated by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, highlight the dangers of a fragmented Europe. In contrast, NATO's longevity and success in maintaining peace indicate the value of a stable, enduring alliance. This historical context suggests that the dissolution of NATO could lead to a return to a more precarious, 19th-century-style balance of power in Europe, with the attendant risks of increased militarization, regional conflicts, and instability. If you want to find more about the challenges facing Europe, check out our next video linked here.